Just ask anyone if they're able to see, they're able to listen. Okay, today's topic is nematodes. Nematodes are elongated symmetric roundworms. The parasitic nematodes, they will be classified broadly into two types. One is tissue nematodes, the other one is intestinal nematodes. The tissue nematodes, they'll cause trichinellosis, visceral and ocular larva migrants, and cutaneous larva migrants, etc. Now coming to intestinal nematodes, they are roundworms. They range from 1 mm to many centimeters when they are mature. So their life cycles are very complex and they are highly varied. So we have two types again. The organisms which can be directly transmitted from person to person are strongyloids and enterobius. But some require a soil phase for maturation. These are Ascaris lumbricoids, Licator americanus, and Ankylostoma duodenum, that is hookworm and roundworms. Most helminthic parasites, they do not self-replicate, and the repeated exposure is required for disease, to produce a disease. Like the repeated exposure with either larva or egg is needed. So as opposed to the asymptomatic infection, clinical disease generally develops when there is prolonged residence in an endemic area, or and it is typically related to the intestinal infection intensity. So if there are repeated infections with the same organism or with the larva and egg, then only there will be a clinical manifestation of the disease. Otherwise, most of the patients, they are asymptomatic. So in patients with marginal nutrition, these helminthic infections, intestinal helminthic infections, they may impair the growth and development of the person. And most of the helminthic infections, the patients will have eosinophilia and elevated serum IgE levels. These are the cardinal manifestations of helminthic infections. Now coming to diseases proper, so we'll deal one by one. One of the organisms which is tissue nematode is Trichinella. Trichinellosis, there will be, if any person eats meat containing cysts of Trichinella, like a pork or other meat from any other carnivore, so these have these cysts in the Trichinella cysts are contained in the muscle of these organisms, like pork means pig. Any people who eat pig or pig meat or any other carnivores. So most infections, they are mild and asymptomatic. Once the patient's immunity develops, these infections, they go away. Patients do not feel any symptoms. But heavy infections, they'll cause severe enteritis. They may cause periorbital edema, myositis, and sometimes the patient may also die of these infections. So Trichinella, there are about 8 species of Trichinella which cause infection in the humans. The most important ones are Trichinella spiralis and Trichinella pseudospiralis. So these are worldwide, seen everywhere in the world. And the other ones are T. nativa, which are in the bears, seen in Arctic regions, T. nelsoni, T. britovi, murelli, tapia, and zambavensis. So these are seen in different parts of the world. So the life cycle goes something like this. The person, the healthy human, they ingest the uncooked meat, undercooked meat, which is infected with Trichinella cysts. So these Trichinella cysts, they go into the they go via the stomach where the cysts are released because of gastric juices, and these larvae are formed. These larvae, they enter the small intestine, and here they form adult worms. So in the small intestine, adults are formed. See, these adults, again, they the larva will be deposited in the mucosa of the small intestine, where they travel via the blood circulation into the muscle. In the muscle, they encysted. These larvae becomes encysted, and this is the end stage, because once they are encysted in the muscle of the human body, they will not be liberated out. So this is the end stage of this organism. So the life cycle becomes like this. Either the domestic cycle will be in the pigs, or it can be in the bears or any other carnivores. So once these meat, uncooked meat, is eaten by the humans, the cysts are released in the gastric juices, and the larvae are released in the small intestine, wherein from the small intestine adults are formed, and these adults, again, larvae is deposited in the mucosa. From the mucosa, through the circulation, it goes into the muscle, and Here in the muscle, they become encysted. Because of this, you have different clinical manifestations. Whenever there is ingestion and into the larva are released in the gastric, in the intestine, here again the patient may have small pain abdomen or some irritation, nausea, vomiting, or any things related to the gastrointestinal tract. So we'll see how the clinical features are. So because of successive phases of parasitic enteric invasion, larval migration, and muscle encystment, there will be symptoms. So if there are less than 10 larvae per gram of muscle, the patient will be asymptomatic. If there are more than 50 larvae per gram of muscle, then it is life-threatening infection. So first week after the infection, the patient will have diarrhea or abdominal pain or constipation, nausea, anything related to the gastrointestinal tract. In the second week, there will be the migrating Trichinella larvae. They provoke a marked local and systemic hypersensitivity reaction. And here, because of this hypersensitivity reaction, the patient will have fever and hypereosinophilia. There may be periorbital and facial edema also there, and hemorrhages can be seen in conjunctiva, retina, and nail beds. That is, splinter hemorrhages can be seen. In the third week, that is, in the second week itself, there can be a maculopapular rash, headache can be there, cough and dyspnea can be there, and even the patient can complain of difficulty in swallowing sometimes. And very rarely, myocarditis with tachyarrhythmias or heart failure is also seen, and the patient may also end up having encephalitis and pneumonitis, which are very fatal to the patient. This is very rare, but they can develop these also, because all these also have muscular tissue wherein the reaction occurs. So with larvae, with larval encystment, the muscle. Excuse me. Yeah. So with larval encystment in the muscle, symptoms of myositis develop. So the patient will have myalgias, muscle edema, and weakness also can develop. The most commonly involved muscles are the extraocular muscles, so around the eyes, the biceps, muscles of neck, lower back, and diaphragm. So when diaphragm is involved, the patient will have breathlessness also. Yes, Kausalya, you have some query? And with pseudospiralis, Trichinella pseudospiralis, they are very uncommon, but these larvae, they do not encapsulate in the muscles, and hence they elicit prolonged polymyositis like illness. So these people, they will have prolonged illnesses with Trichinella pseudospiralis. So what do you see on examination of this patient? Most of the patients will have eosinophilia, blood eosinophilia will be there, and muscle is an affected, hence muscle enzymes. So serum levels of muscle enzymes like creatine kinase will be elevated. So creatine phosphokinase is elevated in most of the symptomatic patients. How do you diagnose? Usually, if there is a rise in titer of parasite-specific antibody, this will occur after the third week of infection. So this will confirm the diagnosis. So, but definitive diagnosis will be, you have to take a muscle biopsy of at least 1 gram, and most better will be anywhere near the tendon insertions. If the muscle is taken from the tendon insertions, it will yield most of the parasite. So the fresh muscle, it should be compressed between a glass slide, two glass slides, and this has to be examined microscopically, because just doing a histopathological examination will not yield the cyst many times. So it has to be examined microscopically, otherwise it will be missed. So treatment will be, because there will be myositis, myalgias, and general weakness, the patient needs bed rest. You can give antipyretics and analgesics. The glucocorticoids like prednisolone, they can be beneficial for severe myositis and myocarditis. If it is really severe, then we can use steroids. Albendazole and mebendazole are active only against enteric stages. Only when the worm is in the intestine, these are effective. But otherwise, if the cysts are in the muscle, they're of no use. So mebendazole and albendazole are active only against the enteric stages of the parasite. So how do you prevent this disease? Any uncooked meat only causes this disease. So cooking pork, if it is, until it is no longer pink, or it has to be frozen till at minus 15 degrees Celsius for 3 weeks. This will prevent the spread of the infection. So you have to cook your meat properly. Now, a note about visceral larva migrans. So the most common form of visceral larva migrans is toxocariasis, and this is due to a larva of the dog ascarid, that is Toxocara canis. And this infection can also be because of feline ascarid, that is T. cati, or rarely due to the pig ascarid, that is Ascaris sum. Toxocariasis. Toxocara cana at times gains entry into the humans, but thereafter it is unable to complete its life cycle. So once it is like a human body, it cannot complete its life cycle. So the larval stage may, however, disseminate to produce visceral larva migrans. So the man becomes infected when, how does he become infected? By swallowing eggs from the coat of the pups. So whenever there are any pups in the house, or you are working with pups and cats, then the children usually are affected. So they swallow the eggs from the coat of the pups. So the eggs can be transferred by flies to the edible food. Either way, it can be affected. The man can be affected. The larvae disseminate, and sometimes they reach the eye, where they give rise to granulomas, rich in eosinophil cells. So this is a typical granuloma because of Toxocara canis in the eye. The infections usually are inapparent, but two clinical presentations are characteristic. One is ocular toxocariasis, the other one is visceral larva migrans syndrome. The ocular toxocariasis is, there is a granuloma formation near the macula which interferes with the vision. Retinal granulomas may be seen with an ophthalmoscope, and because of this, the patient may complain of deteriorating You see a granuloma here. It presents as a yellow-white, round, solitary raised nodule about 1 to 2 centimeter this diameter in size. And it is located either at the macula or in the centrocecal area. So this usually occurs between the age group of 5 and 15 years of age. So they can be differential diagnosis for this is again retinoblastoma, wherein the patient may undergo surgery without with undue when it is not necessary. So you have to be careful in the differential diagnosis. It can be a simple Toxocaria granuloma also. Visceral larva migrans syndrome, usually young children, there will be gross infection, and it is usually associated with mental retardation or pica. That is eating, children eat chalk pieces or mud or something like that. Some children, younger children, they eat. So because of this, there is gross infection. The patient will also have fever, there will be marked eosinophilia, cough will be there, and the patient may end up having recurrent pneumonias, or wheezing also can be seen. At times, even mild hepatomegaly can be seen. So this is a visceral larva migrans in the liver. You can see a granuloma even in the liver. So diagnosis will be definitely diagnosis will be you have to do a liver biopsy. This liver biopsy may reveal hepatic granulomas, and serological tests for toxocaryl antibodies can also be done. Treatment, you have to give either diethyl carbamazine or mebendazole. So this is for the organism as such. But for the inflammation or for the granulomas, you can give local or systemic steroids, and the photocoagulation can be done if the lesion is very near to the macula. Prevention, pet dogs and pups should be rendered safe. They have to be dewormed occasionally. The other one, cutaneous larva migrans. This is also called as creeping eruption. And this is a serpiginous skin eruption. It is caused by burrowing of the larva of animal hookworms, usually the dog and that is Ankylostoma brasiliensis. These larvae, they hatch from the eggs passed in a dog stool or cat feces, and they mature in the soil. And humans generally become infected after skin comes in contact with these soil frequented by the cats and dogs. So it is most prevalent among the children and travelers. So after these larvae, they enter the skin, erythematous lesions, they form along the tortuous tracts of their migration through the dermal epidermal junction. And these larvae, they migrate almost many centimeters in a day. So there will be intensely pruritic lesions anywhere on the body, and even vesicles and bullae may form later. So this is a typical picture where you see cutaneous larva migrans. You see all these are because the larvae, they go in the dermal epidermal junction. They move in between the dermal and epidermal junction, eliciting the reaction. But these animal hookworms, they do not mature in larvae. So without treatment, these larvae die after few days. So from few weeks to couple of months, they die, and the skin lesions, they resolve without any treatment also. Usually the diagnosis is clinically made, and skin biopsies very rarely detect any diagnostic larvae. You don't see many larvae, and symptoms can be alleviated by ivermectin or albendazole. So now coming to those were the tissue nematodes. Now we have intestinal nematodes as such. So these are more important. So intestinal nematodes, one is Ascariasis, that is roundworms. Then we have hookworms like Necator americanus, or other thing is strongyloids. So all this we'll deal now. So what is Ascariasis? Ascariasis, it is caused by Ascaris lumbricoides, and it is the largest intestinal nematode. It will be around 40 centimeters, 10 to 40 centimeters in length. So most infections usually have low burden and are asymptomatic. So most of the individuals, they'll be asymptomatic. But the clinical features, they develop once the larval migration occurs into the lungs, or the adult worms are there in the intestine. So either of these two can cause disease. So the life cycle is like this. In once the patient or infected person, in the feces, they pass the eggs. So unfertilized eggs, they will not undergo any development, they die. The fertilized eggs, so these fertilized eggs, they hatch, they become larva, L3 larva, and once these larvae are ingested by the human body, so the person ingests this, and through the blood circulation, they reach the lungs. Once they reach the lungs, they mature here, and these hatched larvae, they enter the circulation and they migrate in the lungs. They become they are coughed up. They're coughed up and again swallowed. These larvae, they'll be swallowed again by the human being once they're coughed up. So on swallowing, again they enter the gastrointestinal tract, and they mature in the small intestine. So here in the small intestine, they become adults. So these adults, again, they are very fecund, they give rise to about approximately 2.4 lakhs eggs. Each adult Ascaris, female adult Ascaris worm can give rise to about 2,40,000 eggs per day. So they are extremely thickened. So these eggs, they'll be passed into the stools and again they become infected. So this is how the cycle goes on. So widely distributed in all the tropical and subtropical regions, and it is seen mostly even in other humid areas. So transmission occurs usually through contaminated, fecally contaminated soil. So usually it is because of either lack of sanitary facilities or because of use of many places they use human feces as fertilizer. So because of this, even the vegetables get infected and we can acquire the disease like that. So because of hand-to-mouth fecal carriage, younger children are the most affected. So young children will be more affected with ascariasis. And outside the endemic areas, though it is very rare, it can occur when eggs are transported on the vegetables, and these are ingested by the people. So we have the clinical phase again will be like this because of lung infection or because of intestinal infection. So because during the lung phase of the larval migration, 9 to 12 days after the egg injection, the patients may develop an irritating non-productive cough. The patient will have cough and burning sensation in the substernal region. And this will be aggravated again on inspiration, deep inspiration or coughing. So there will be cough, non-productive cough, and then there will be substernal pain. And the patient also will have breathlessness or they can have blood tinged sputum, but it is very less common. Fever will be there because of inflammation, and eosinophilia develops during this phase of the lung migration, and usually it subsides once the larvae they migrate. Chest X-rays may also show evidence of eosinophilic pneumonitis. This is typically called as Loeffler syndrome. In Loeffler syndrome, what do you see? You see rounded infiltrates, a few millimeters to several centimeters in size. These infiltrates, they may be transient and they may be intermittent, and they clear after several weeks. So you see rounded infiltrates from a few millimeters to several centimeters in size. They'll be transient, intermittent, and they clear after several weeks. So in heavy infection in the children, there will be many, sometimes what happens, large bolus of worms, they get entangled and then they lodge in the small bowel. And because of this, they obstruct the small bowel. The patient can have pain and sometimes it can perforate or there can be intussusception or can be volvulus. So these all can occur because of Ascaris worms. If there are adult worms, the adult worms become entangled to each other. They form a bolus and they can obstruct the intestinal lumen, causing perforation, intussusception, or volvulus. Single worms may also cause disease when they migrate to aberrant sites like eyelids or other places. So a large worm, it can enter and occlude the biliary tree, or it can cause biliary colic. It can also enter the gallbladder, causing cholecystitis, cholangitis, or pancreatitis. It also can enter into the liver and then cause intrahepatic abscesses. So these single worms can cause infection like this. So migration of an adult worm into the esophagus can provoke coughing and the oral expulsion of the worm. So patients mainly come with complaints like this also, that they have coughed up an adult worm or they have vomited a worm. So how do you diagnose? So microscopic detection is characteristic. The eggs will be 65 into 45 micrometer in fecal samples. And patients, sometimes I told you, they present with expulsion of worms. So large size and it is smooth cream colored surface in the stool, or rarely through the mouth or nose. So mouth or nose, it can be expelled. So in early transpulmonary migratory phase, so larvae can be seen in the sputum or gastric juice, even before the diagnostic eggs appear in the stool. So the early phase is lungs. Lungs are infected first, and then once they are coughed up and swallowed, they go into the intestine. Hence, these can even in the sputum or gastric juice, these larvae can be seen. So you can do a CT scan. CT scan contrast can show adult worms in the intestines. Plain abdominal pill can reveal masses, entangled worms of masses in gas-filled loops of bubble if there is intestinal obstruction. Or even pancreatic or biliary worms can be detected by ultrasound or ERCP, endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography. Even ERCP can be like it can be diagnostic as well as therapeutic also. You can remove the worms via this ERCP. Treatment will be albendazole 400 milligrams a single dose, or mebendazole 100 milligrams twice a day for 3 days, or 500 milligrams once a day. Or you can go with ivermectin 150 milligrams to 200 milligrams, 200 micrograms per kg once statin dose. All the three drugs are contraindicated in pregnancy, so you can give only in other people. So if there is partial intestinal obstruction, it can be managed with nasogastric suction, IV fluids, or we can instill piperazine through the nasogastric tube. The complete obstruction, anyways, it needs surgical intervention. So that is about Ascaris. So we have seen life cycle. Once there is embryonated eggs are ingested, it goes into the larvae migrate into the circulation into the lungs. Through the lungs, they are coughed up because they they invade the alveoli and they come out into the bronchial tree and they are coughed out. Once they are coughed out, they are re-swallowed and they enter the gastric tract. Here they mature and form the adult worms. Adult worms, again they pass, each female worm, it passes about 2.4 lakh eggs per day. And these eggs are again infected. They go into the soil and they become larvae. So depending on these phases, you have clinical manifestations also. Now the next organism is hookworm infestation. Hookworm, you have two species. One is Ankylostoma duodenale, the other one is Necator americanus. So these are again hookworm infestations. Most of these hookworm infestations are also asymptomatic, and they develop from a variety of combination of factors. Usually there should be a heavy worm burden and there should be prolonged duration of infection. Along with inadequate iron intake will cause the disease. Otherwise, usually patient is asymptomatic. And these infestation usually causes iron deficiency anemia, or it can cause hypoproteinemia also. So how does these hookworm infestation occur? So what happens is the eggs are in the feces. These eggs, they either become rabbitiform larva because they hatch and they become rabbitiform larva, and this develops into the infective stage, that is filariform larva. This filariform larva, again, this is the one which is going to be infected. So it enters the skin. If the patient is in barefoot, the patient usually in the farms, they walk barefoot. These larvae, they enter the skin of the patient, and through the skin, they penetrate into the circulation. In the circulation, they enter the lungs. Through the circulation, they enter the lungs, and here again, they are coughed up and swallowed, and after swallowing, they enter the small intestine. In the duodenum, some become dormant and they may be reactivated after a very long duration, or they are activated into the adult worms. And here again, these adult worms, they are going to produce eggs. And once again, the eggs are being excreted in the feces. So this is the life cycle. So they don't need an intermediate host. So they need only the soil for development. So in the soil itself, they develop. The eggs develop into rabbitiform larva, and these rabbitiform larva, it again develops into filariform larva, which is the infective stage. So once it enters the lungs, it is coughed up and swallowed and into the intestine. In the intestine, they mature into adult worms, right? So each Ankylostoma duodenale, each worm can it invades the mucosa of the intestine, and even 0.2 ml per 0.2 ml blood is taken up by these adult Ankylostoma per day. So 0.2 ml per day. If they are infected for a long duration, so the patient will end up having iron deficiency anemia also. So this is how the life cycle goes on. So epidemiology. These Ankylostoma duodenale, it is prevalent in the southern Europe, northern America, and northern Asia. So this in Necator americanus, it is the predominant species in the western hemisphere and equatorial Africa. So usually these two species, they may overlap in many tropical regions, particularly the Southeast Asia. So older children again have the highest incidence and greatest intensity of hookworm infestation, because these are the ones who go bare feet and they play in the infested soil. So in rural areas where fields are fertilized with human feces, even older working adults like the farmers may also be heavily infected. Clinically, we have already told that is there, mostly asymptomatic. If they are repeatedly infected, these infective larvae, they provoke pruritic maculopapular dermatitis, that is called as ground itch. Where they enter, these infective larvae, wherever they enter the skin, they can cause ground itch at the site of skin penetration. And these larvae, as they go into the subcutaneous tissue, they migrate, they form serpiginous tracts. Similarly, as we have seen in cutaneous larva migrants, similar to cutaneous larva migrants, these also form tracts. Obviously, in the previously sensitized patients, once the patient is sensitized to the infection, to these larvae, these patients, they develop ground itch, and subcutaneous migration causes serpiginous tracts. So in the lungs, the patient may, because of migration of the larva into the lungs, the organism can cause pneumonitis. Once the organism, once the worm enter the intestine, they will cause mild epigastric pain. Usually this epigastric pain, it will be accentuated after eating food. And the patient may also complain of inflammatory diarrhea and other abdominal symptoms. And usually they are accompanied by eosinophilia. So intestinal phase, they'll also have pain abdomen, epigastric pain, and diarrhea. And because of long infection, the patient will have progressive iron deficiency anemia, because these hookworms, they are going to feed on the blood and interstitial fluid. So these two are taken up by the organisms for growth. So these hookworms, they take up blood from the body. Hence, if there is progressive infection, there will be anemia, iron deficiency anemia. Also, there will be hypoproteinemia. These will cause weakness and generalized malaise. The patient may also have shortness of breath. So what do you see? You can, on examination of the feces, you can see a hookworm. Hookworm eggs are oval in shape. They'll be 40 into 60 micrometers. And if it is not fresh, if the stool sample is not fresh, you can see rhabditiform larvae in the sample. So eggs will be seen only in the fresh sample of stool. On blood examination, the patient will have hypochromic microcytic anemia. The patient may also have eosinophilia and hypoproteinemia. What do you treat? You give albendazole, either 400 mg stat, or you can use mebendazole 500 mg stat. And iron deficiency anemia can be managed just with oral iron is enough. Oral iron can be given. If there is severe infection and if there is severe hypoproteinemia, then you have to give nutritional support, and the oral iron also need to be given along with deworming, like along with albendazole or mebendazole, you need to give iron and protein supplement. Now comes the other organism, which is Strongyloides stercoralis. So this strongyloids, this is very unique. In the sense, none of the other organisms, they are able to replicate in the human host. They need a soil. So this strongyloids, it doesn't require any soil. It can replicate in the body. Once it enters the body, it has ongoing cycles, and it reinfects the organism again and again in the body itself. So this is unique, and it has self-replicating, self-replicating in the human host, and it gives ongoing cycles of auto-infection. And these infective larvae are produced within the body. So especially if this infection occurs in immunocompromised patients, like the patients who are on steroids, or the patients who are diabetics, or the patients who are HIV positive. So in these patients, the patients will, these strongyloids, this can disseminate widely and they can cause death of the patient. So the life cycle is like this. So the rabbitiform larvae are excreted in the stool, and they can either, dogs can also serve as definitive host for these. So these rabbitiform larvae, they can be alive in the soil for a long duration. So they can mature in the soil also. So what happens is, once they can, these rabbitiform larvae, once they are excreted in the feces, they can develop into free living adult worms in the soil itself. And here again, they can produce eggs. And these eggs can again, the rabbitiform larva can hatch from these eggs, and again the filariform larva, which are the infective stage, can form from these eggs in the soil itself. These filariform larva, they once they enter the skin of the person, they enter the definitive host. Once they enter the definitive host, even in the host itself, they can multiply again and again. So they don't require the soil always. Soil also they can individually mature. In the body also they can replicate again. So these, once they, same process, once they penetrate the skin, they enter the circulation, enter into the lungs, and in the lungs they go into the alveoli, they rupture the alveoli, they go into the bronchial tree, they are coughed up, and from coughing up they are swallowed, and after swallowing they enter the small intestine, where they become the adults. Here these adults, they again, they here these each adult, it can give rise to lots of eggs, and these eggs are deposited in the intestinal mucosa. And here in the intestinal mucosa, rabbitiform larvae are formed, which are excreted in the stools. So eggs can be excreted and rabbitiform larvae both can be excreted. But what happens is, once these rabbitiform larvae, they can again penetrate the intestinal mucosa or from the perianal skin, and then again it can migrate into the other organs. So here again they can replicate, they can have a cycle in the human body itself, or they can replicate in the soil also. So they have two ways of replication. Auto-infection is seen with these organisms. So how are they distributed? They are smartly distributed in tropical areas where the environment is hot and humid, particularly in the Southeast Asia. So United States, also this parasite is endemic in some parts, and it is found in immigrants, refugees, travelers, and military personnel who have lived in the endemic areas. Most of the patients are asymptomatic, or they may have mild cutaneous or abdominal symptoms. Whenever the larva is going through the skin, it can cause cutaneous symptoms. When it enters the intestine, it can cause mild abdominal discomfort or diarrhea. In the recurrent urticaria, usually this urticaria will be around the buttocks or wrists. These migrating larvae, they can elicit a pathognomonic serpiginous eruption called as larva currents. So these larva currents means which is running, the larva which is running. So it is called as running larva. It will cause pruritic raised erythematous lesions, and it can advance as rapidly as 10 centimeters per hour along the course of larval migration. So the migrating larva, they can elicit a serpiginous eruption called as larva currents. These adult parasites, they burrow into the duodenojejunal mucosa, and they can cause abdominal pain. Again, this pain also, it is usually mildly epigastric, and mid-epigastric pain will be there, and it resembles the peptic ulcer pain, but usually it is also aggravated by after food intake. So food intake causes aggravation of the pain, abdominal pain. The patient may also have nausea, diarrhea, gastrointestinal bleeding, and mild colitis-like symptoms, or weight loss can also occur with prolonged infection. Small bowel obstruction may develop with heavy infection. Pulmonary symptoms are anyways very rare, unlike those seen with hookworm infection. And eosinophilia is also common in these infections. And abrogation of host immunity, especially with glucocorticoid therapy. If the patient is having glucocorticoid therapy or other immunosuppressive medication, this will lead to hyperinfection of strongyloids cervicalis. So, and in these patients, there may be colitis, enterocolitis, or enteritis, or malabsorption can occur. If the strongyloidosis is disseminated, the larvae can also go into the central nervous system, into the peritoneum, liver, and kidneys. And hence there can be bacteremia also. If these disseminate into the blood, bacteremia may also develop. Gram-negative sepsis can occur, pneumonia and meningitis may also complicate and dominate the clinical course. So this, if once it is disseminated because of some host immunity loss, because of some immunosuppressives, usage of immunosuppressives or immunosuppressive condition, the patient may end up having gram-negative sepsis, pneumonia or meningitis. How do you diagnose? So in the feces, we see rhabditiform larva. So looking at these larvae, we can diagnose. Usually these larvae are approximately 250 micron meter long and they have short buccal cavity. And unlike hookworm larva, they have plates and hooks. The ankylostoma will be having hooks and Necator americanus will have plates for catching hold of the skin, for infecting the skin. Here they have short buccal cavity. So serial examinations and use of agar plate gel method may improve the diagnosis and sensitivity. And the PCR is also mostly used nowadays, and it increases the specificity of diagnosis. ELISA for serum antibodies to antigens of strongyloids is a sensitive method. Usually it is used for uncomplicated infections because there is potential exposure history. If at all the patient has exposure history, if the patient has eosinophilia, if the patient is on glucocorticoid treatment, you want to know whether there is infection of strongyloids, then you can do a ELISA test. In disseminated strongyloidiasis, filariform larvae should be sought in sputum, bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, or surgical drainage fluid. So it disseminates elsewhere. So you have to look for larvae in other fluids like sputum and bowel. How do you treat ivermectin 200 microgram per kg daily for 2 days? It is more effective than albendazole 400 milligram daily for 3 days. In disseminated cases, ivermectin should be extended for at least 5 to 7 days or until the parasites have been eradicated. So you need to give a more prolonged course if there is dissemination. Immunocompromised patients, however, you have to repeat the ivermectin dose 2 weeks after the initial treatment. You give for 1 week and then after 2 weeks again you repeat the course of ivermectin. Now the other infection is trichuriasis, which is usually the patients are asymptomatic here, and the heavy infection may cause gastrointestinal symptoms. So this is also called as whipworm. Whipworm is usually distributed globally in the tropics and subtropics. It is most common among poor children, usually from resource poor regions of the world. Here nothing, the patient unembryonic eggs are passed in the feces, and this unembryonic eggs, they become 2-cell and advanced cleavage, and again they become the larva where they ingested. These eggs are ingested by the human body and they enter into the small intestine where the larva hatch and become adult worms. And adult worms, they concentrate in the cecum. Here in the cecum, they pass eggs. Eggs are formed and eggs are deposited in the rectum where they are passed into the stools. So usually the patient will not have any symptoms or just eosinophilia may be there, mild itch can be there. Heavy infections will result in anemia, abdominal pain, anorexia, or usually bloody and mucoid diarrhea. This all symptoms, they may resemble inflammatory bowel disease. So you have to look for these infections. Because of heavy burden in the cecum, there may be rectal prolapse can occur because of heavy burden in the adult worms, or there can be growth retardation if it is in the children. You diagnose on stool examination, the eggs are readily detected. They will be 20 into 50 micron meter lemon-shaped eggs. And adult worms, they are 3 to 4 centimeters, 5 to 6 centimeters long. They are usually seen on proctoscopy. If you do a proctoscopy, you can see the adult worms on the proctoscope. Treatment is simple. You give mebendazole 500 mg once or albendazole 400 mg daily for 3 doses. These give a cure rate of 70 to 90%. Ivermectin is also used, but it is not as efficacious. Ivermectin in the dose of 200 microgram per kg daily for 3 doses is used. The last one is Enterobius vermicularis. It is more common, pinworm. It is more common in the temperate countries than in the tropics. So these eggs, They are in the perianal folds. Usually, they are ingested by the host. They enter the small intestine. Adults are formed, and these gravid females they migrate to the perianal region. At night, they lay eggs. So each female lays about 2,000 eggs per day. In the night times, there will be itching because of these gravid female. This goes on around the perineal region, and here the eggs are laid, and again through hand, these eggs will be passed on to the mouth. So usually, again, the patients are asymptomatic, but perianal pruritus is the cardinal symptom. Usually, the patient will have itching around the anal region. The itching usually will be worse at night, and because of migration of the female worms during the night time. And intense itching, and if the patient scratches, there can be excoriation, and because of excoriation, there can be secondary infection on the excoriated area, leading to bacterial superinfection. So heavy infections again may cause abdominal pain and weight loss. And rarely these pinworms, they invade the female genital tract. They go into the female genital tract. They can cause vulvovaginitis or pelvic or peritoneal granulomas. It's very rare, but they can cause severe granulomas in the pelvic or peritoneal regions. Eosinophilia, however, is very uncommon in these cases. So, enterobius eosinophilia is very uncommon. Diagnosis: you cannot diagnose these eggs in the feces because they are not passed in the feces. They come and the eggs are laid over the perianal region. So what do we do is we have to apply a clear cellulose acetate tape to the perianal region in the morning, early in the morning. And this tape, it has to be transferred to a slide. And on examination, on microscopic examination, you can detect the oval 55 into 25 micrometer pinworm eggs. They will be flattened on one side and curved on the other side. So these can be seen after the tape is seen under the microscope. Treatment is mebendazole 100 mg once, or albendazole 400 mg